Like, yes, this is what a fairy tale retelling should aspire to. Sarah J. Maas, take fucking notes! I'm sorry, that was rather aggressive. What's up, book nerds? I'm Lucky's Universe, and in this week's video, I want to talk about fairy tale retellings, aka either the best or worst thing to ever be adopted by the young adult genre. In this video, I will be discussing 4 different young adult series that were inspired by classic fairy tales and where I think they sit on the dependable 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being, well, falling into a 100-year sleep would be a roller coaster ride compared to this story, and 10 being, well, that was bippity-boppity brilliant, I must say. Before I begin, I probably should start with a disclaimer. These are purely my opinions. These are not objective facts about these series. When judging this series, I am taking into account the characters, how well I liked them, how well I connected with them, how well they were developed by the author, and of course the author's interpretation of the fairy tale that inspired their story, and how creative or original their adaptation was. I will not judge too harshly on the writing style of these books because I understand that as a 22-year-old woman, most YA series are marketed towards readers who are a lot younger than I am, so I feel like it's not entirely fair to judge in that regard. Alright, let's get into it. So the first series that I'll be talking about is one that probably everyone expects me to talk about, and that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. If you haven't already, or you would like to waste a few hours of your time listening to me drag this series, go and watch my Court of Thorns and Roses review series, which I'll leave linked up here. If you want to save yourself the mental anguish, the basic summary of those videos is that I really hate this series. I think the writing is bad, I think the plot is bad, I think the characters are bad. It's all so bad. In my opinion, this is not an objective fact. This is just my opinion of these books based on what I like to read and what I consider to be good writing. Oh man, trying not to get cancelled these days is just, oh my gosh, it's really difficult. If you don't know about this series, you must not only have been living under a rock for the past decade, but also living under a rock which was then yeeted into space, because dude, how do you not know about this series? To put it in as few words as possible, this girl named Feyre gets kidnapped by a fairy and she goes and lives in his castle. She falls in love with him, but then it turns out she's actually the mate of a different fairy with a way bigger dick. That fairy kidnaps her and then she falls in love with him. You will not convince me that there is more to the story than that. The reason that A Court of Thorns and Roses, or ACOTAR, is being discussed in this video is because it was originally inspired by the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale, which is about a girl named Belle who is held captive by a beast who's actually a cursed prince, and she falls in love with him. Okay, so let's start off with the pros of this story. Feyre's a nice name. I want everyone to know that when I was planning this video, I genuinely tried to find things that I liked or even like mildly appreciated about this book, but sometimes we have to accept the things that we cannot change, and I just cannot make myself like anything about these books. And you know what? The books did not impress me, but I impressed myself for actually getting through all of them, save for the novella, but I already know what happens, so I don't want to put myself through having to read about an adult man getting off to the mentally projected image of his unborn child. I mean, seriously, dude, what has happened to the YA genre? So what didn't I like about this series? Ha! Well, I'll try and keep this short. I'm not gonna go into writing, like I said, not gonna try and judge too much based on writing, so if you wanna hear me talk about the writing style of this book, go check out my review series. But what I am judging it on is the characters, and the characters, they just suck. There's really nothing else to it. Feyre is the poster child for I'm not like other girls. I think I once described her as Bella Swan trying to be Katniss Everdeen and failing miserably, and all the other characters are just really bad stereotypes. You've got Prince Charming Tamlin, Dark Prince Rhysand, extroverted and promiscuous female friend Morrigan, who also happens to be the token lesbian, submissive sister Elaine, and mean sister Nesta. It's like reading a YA blueprint, only it's been photocopied 100 times, so the quality has deteriorated. In terms of plot, the first book, ACOTAR, follows the Beauty and the Beast tale pretty closely. A girl offers herself to be the prisoner of a prince in order to save her family, and she breaks a curse, they fall in love, like, you know the drill. However, the other books kind of go off on their own fairly comprehensible journey, and then you kind of forget that it was supposed to be a fairy tale retelling. Fairy tale retellings often struggle with predictability because the authors are basing their story off a primary source material that everybody knows, and these days most people even know the non-Disney versions of the tale, so it becomes even harder for authors to be original. In my opinion, the first book, ACOTAR, just doesn't divert enough from the original fairy tale in order to be interesting. And although books 2 and 3 abandon the Beauty and the Beast tale for the most part, they become predictable just as YA novels. It's very clear who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, where the romance is going, how the story will end. I'm sorry, but I just don't vibe with this series or like any of Sarah J Maas's books in general, so in terms of fairy tale retellings, just based off A Court of Thorns and Roses, I am giving this fairy tale retelling a 1 out of 10. Next up, we have the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Mayer. Before I move forward, I definitely need to point out that I have not read this series in its entirety. I have only read books 1 and 2, and then I unfortunately DNF'd or did not finish this series. So what I'm about to say about these retellings is only based off books 1 and 2, Cinder and Scarlet. The Lunar Chronicles is a very, very popular YA romance series with each book based off a different fairy tale. Cinderella, Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, and then I think the last book is Snow White. The stories are all connected, operating within the same storyline, and the characters intersect, the plots overlap, but each book has a different main character. The first book, Cinder, is obviously inspired by Cinderella and is set in a technotopian city named New Beijing with our main character, Cinder, who is a cyborg mechanic living with her stepmother and stepsisters. Events of the novel lead Cinder to Prince Kai, and there's romance and there's action. It's a very standard YA romance novel, but I still thought it was good. I enjoyed Cinder because of Cinder. She was the only character in the entire book that received like proper character development. And then I also thought the author's interpretation of the Cinderella fairy tale was excellent. It was a great take on the story. I hadn't come across it before, and then Cinder turned out to be a pretty strong female lead. The downfall of this series came in the form of its second installment, Scarlet. Book 2 takes place a little while after the events of the first book and centers itself around a girl named Scarlet whose grandmother has been kidnapped, and then also Scarlet's 24-hour whirlwind romance with this dude named Wolf. There were 2 reasons that I disliked this book. Number 1 was because I enjoyed the first book because of Cinder, and Cinder was only in a few chapters of the second book because it was obviously about Scarlet, the book switched main characters. Number 2 was that Scarlet just could not compare to Cinder's character in terms of development and substance. Cinder was a half-robot mechanic with superpowers. Scarlet was a delivery girl who literally had no other talents other than the ability to fall in love within 24 hours. And I could not make myself care about her problems. And then we have how the author interpreted the Red Riding Hood fairy tale. This book gave me one of these rare moments where I actually wish the author had stuck closer to the original tale. Scarlet bears almost no resemblance to Red Riding Hood other than the main girl having a grandmother and then naming one of the characters Wolf. I'd even argue whether you could classify this as a retelling at all. After reading Scarlet, I decided not to finish the rest of the series, mainly because although Cinder was a good book, it was only a good book. It wasn't great, it wasn't amazing, and I cannot commit myself to an entire series if not even one of the books is amazing. Plus the last book, Winter, is so thick. It's like 800 pages and ain't nobody got time for 800 pages of basic ass YA romance. So on the grand scale of YA fairy tale retellings, based only off what I have read of the series so far, the Lunar Chronicles gets a cautious 5 out of 10 from me. Moving on, we have A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer, which was inspired by Beauty and the Beast. Again, before saying anything, I must forewarn you that I have not read the last book in this trilogy. In fact, I think it was only released like a couple of days ago at the time I'm filming this video. So yeah, what I'm about to say is based off books 1 and 2. And let me just tell you about it. Book 1, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, is about Harper, who is accidentally kidnapped and forced to live in a castle with a handsome prince who tries to make her fall in love with him, because if she doesn't fall in love with him, he's going to turn into a beast and kill a bunch of people. So not ideal. I actually enjoyed this book a lot, and I also did a review on it. So if you want me to go into more depth about just this one book, go watch my review. It was cheesy and it was predictable because the fairy tale, but the writing was on the older side of YA, so I enjoyed it a lot more. When I say the older side of YA, I'm talking about how the YA genre spans between ages 12 and 18 usually. As most of you would know, a 12-year-old has a very different reading comprehension level than an 18-year-old, and so most YA authors will either write for a younger target audience or an older target audience within YA. Books like Percy Jackson, for instance, they are classified as, or most of them are classified as YA, but they're 12 to 15 YA. Whereas something like A Court of Thorns and Roses is still YA, but it's definitely more 16 to 18 YA. Although in my opinion, ACOTAR should really be in the adult category, but whatever. What separates the young and old sides of YA is the writing complexity and also the types of themes that are introduced in the books. Alright, back to A Curse So Dark and Lonely. Like I said, it was on the older side of YA, so the writing was more advanced and the themes were more complex, and it just made it easier for me to enjoy it. Harper's character was great. She's like one of the few female protagonists that had a disability. She's not your garden variety, not like other girls' girl, more like a girl who's actually not like other girls. And she just had a lot of substance. She went through a lot of development. She just was a very intelligently constructed character. And plus the author didn't spend 3/4 of the book like constantly telling the readers how smart she was and how brave and independent she was. Like the author let Harper's actions speak for themselves, which is really, that's the whole show not tell aspect of writing. That's what writers should aim for. There was a really well-developed relationship dynamic between the three main characters, Gray, Harper, and Ren, and I was so excited to read more about their dynamic, but then I read A Heart So Fierce and Broken. Someone tell me this, why are all of these fairy tale retelling series switching main characters each book? Like, I'm getting whiplash, I cannot keep up. The second book has Gray from the first book as the main character and also introduces a new female protagonist, Liamara, and that's where it all starts going downhill. There was a reason that Gray was not the protagonist of the first book, and that was because he did not have the substance. For the first few chapters, I held out the hope that he was gonna develop a little more, gain some emotional depth, maybe add a few dimensions to his character, but he just stayed the same. He was just this flat, boring, idealistic, good guy protagonist that was he just wasn't interesting to read. Liamara had, unfortunately, the bad luck of following up a character like Harper. You could tell that the author really tried to make Liamara the next Harper, but she just ain't it. She was so far from it. Much like Gray, she was just flat and lacked development and did not improve as the novel progressed. Now, characters aside, let's talk about the fairy tale aspect. I'm so over Beauty and the Beast retellings at this point, mainly because I think that they are the most common fairy tale retellings in YA, and I actually have a theory about this. Most writers were probably avid readers when they were children, and Belle from Beauty and the Beast was a character that was all about reading. So chances are, if you were a reader as a kid and you watched Disney, your favorite princess was probably Belle. And so when you get older and want to be a writer and want to do a fairy tale retelling, you would clearly pick the fairy tale that was your favorite as a child, which would be Beauty and the Beast. And that's why there's so many Beauty and the Beast retellings. Now, am I right or am I right? Although the author didn't stray too far from the original tale in book 1, there were still a couple of subversions that were really refreshing. Without giving too much away, I appreciated the ambiguity in regards to Ren's curse, and I liked how Harper continuously broke the Belle stereotype. I feel like because I liked A Curse So Dark and Lonely so much, but A Heart So Fierce and Broken sucked so much. I can't really make a clear judgment about this series until I read the third book, A Vow So Bold and Deadly. Although from the blurb and the excerpts that I've been reading in anticipation for A Vow So Bold and Deadly's release, something tells me I'm not gonna like how this story pans out. So I'm just gonna average out these books, and if we've got A Curse So Dark and Lonely sitting at an 8.5 out of 10, and then book 2, Recovering from Middle Book Syndrome at 5 out of 10, then this retelling comes in at a steady 6.75 out of 10, and I'm gonna round that up to a 7 because I'm feeling charitable. We have saved the best for last with this final series that is actually yet to be completed, the Forest of Good and Evil series by Gina Showalter. I think of this series as what the Lunar Chronicles could have been. In short, the universe in this book, Enchantia, is a place where many people are born to fairy tale prophecies, and they are fated to be different characters in different stories. The first book is inspired by Snow White, where the main girl Everly discovers that she is fated to be the evil queen, and then the second book is about a girl who was born into the Cinderella prophecy. Like seemingly every retelling, each book has a different main character, but they're all on the same storyline within the same timeline, the characters intersect, and the plots somewhat overlap. These books kind of remind me of trashy reality TV. Like when you squint, it's actually kind of bad, but it doesn't mean that it's not thoroughly entertaining. I found these books really funny, and there's so much drama, and the romances to this point have all been enemies to lovers, but like that really cheesy cliche enemies to lovers that makes you feel guilty for liking. I liked that these books didn't pretend to be anything that they weren't. The author flipped the fairy tales on their heads in a really interesting way, like making the protagonist also the antagonist in The Evil Queen, and also getting very interpretive with the Cinderella fairy tale in Glass Queen, but still keeping the main story as just a really cheesy, squeal-inducing romance. They are books that don't take themselves too seriously, and that's what made me enjoy them. These books are also on the older side of YA, not so much in writing, but definitely in themes, because there are some adult themes, not so much in Evil Queen, but in Glass Queen, there's like this one scene that's just, even though I'm really not a fan of smut in books, there was only like maybe a full page of it, and I appreciate the less is more approach to romance, especially in YA, because I feel like if authors just launch right in to the whole smut thing and describe absolutely everything that happens, and it happens multiple times throughout the book, it just takes away the mystery and the excitement, you know? This series so far just, like, it takes the cake in terms of fairy tale retellings. Like, yes, this is what a fairy tale retelling should aspire to. Sarah J. Maas, take fucking notes! I'm sorry, that was rather aggressive. In conclusion, the Forest of Good and Evil series gets a strong 9.5 out of 10 from me, and I am so excited to read the rest of the books when they come out. I don't actually know how many books are going to be in this series. I assume 4, because in the second book, Glass Queen, there was this moment where the main girl was thinking about all the different greetings from the different kingdoms. There were only 4 of them, 2 of which were her kingdom and the kingdom from the first book, Evil Queen. And then one of the greetings had something to do with water, so I'm guessing it's gonna be like Little Mermaid inspired, so that'll be exciting. But I'm not sure, so we'll just have to see where it goes. So friends, that brings us to the end of our short adventure into young adult fairy tale retellings. I hope you had fun, and leave a comment below about your favorite fairy tale retelling, or a story that you wish a author would retell, or if you're feeling brave, leave a short spiel about your own idea for a fairy tale retelling. If you don't already follow me on TikTok, go check that out. I post some pretty cool stuff on there. I will also leave a link to my Goodreads and my Twitter account below if you want to keep up with what I'm reading. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.